found The Naked Truth. Lively discussions about business, marketing, and personal development for small business owners. No hype, just help.
Hello everybody, happy Wednesday. Today we bring you the secret weapon behind turning your business into a machine of referrals. We have a specific 3-step system that our guest is going to walk you through. And so what you guys want to do right now is come on here, bethenakedtruth.com/live, hop on in, because I'm telling you the next 30 minutes are going to be the best 30 minutes you've ever spent this week working on your business. And,
sweet baby Jesus, you just put a lot out there. You're like secret weapon machine, best 30 minutes of your life. You're building this. You put a lot of pressure on Michael here, if I.
Sure. And you know why? Because I just spent an hour and a half with this amazing man, and I'm telling you, this is like the biggest weapon in my arsenal right now to becoming a referral business. Yes, he is so on point. He's so amazing. Can't say much about him.
Michael, part of my role as a co-host is to balance out my co-host. So I'm just going to tell you, I have no expectations of you whatsoever. and I'm sure that, everything's going to be fine. So
much appreciated. We'll just roll with it, right?
Let's roll with it. And before we do, guys, remember, yesterday, so many of you hopped in, commented, interacted, and now you can see your names in the wheel of names that we will spin this Friday. So if you're watching us right now and you want to win something this week, comment, interact, hop into bethenakedtruth.com/live, because awesome things are awaiting you. And this one, let's start with this one. So if you guys remember, back 2-3 weeks ago, I interviewed Philip Stutz, who took the consumer sentiment and said there are 3 messages that you should focus on right now: trust, helping others, and safety. And these are the things that can come in and turn your business from just one that you need to talk about all the time into a referral business. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've been in Broadway, tell me all that stuff, and then you turn into consulting and stuff. Jump in or let everybody get to know you.
Yeah, so the joke I always make is that I've lived about 17 different lives at this point. So I started out as a high school English teacher, and I went from being a high school English teacher to a Broadway producer in under 2 years. So a lot of people were very curious as to how I did that. And I was getting my master's in educational theater from NYU. And while I was getting my master's, I was actually mentoring student teachers from the program. So I was teaching high school while mentoring student teachers, while running a theater company. So I was sort of in this inception level of education. And over time, I started to notice that basically I was getting into all of these rooms and people just kept talking about me or kept referring me to other people and connecting me to other people. And at the very beginning, I thought it was about relationships only. I thought, because I'm a good connector, that's why everybody's sort of making these introductions. But probably about 3 years ago, I started to take a look back at all of the different instances. I was brought into an educational technology startup without having any actual startup background. I ran a conference for a number of years without ever having any conference background. So on all these things, I looked at what the pattern was, and I realized the pattern was that people would talk about me when I wasn't in the room in a good way. They would always share my ideas. They would always sort of send people my way. And when I realized this, I said, wait a second, there's something here. So I was teaching one of my networking workshops, and I decided to take about 15 minutes to talk to the group about this idea of creating a referable brand, where I said, I think that there's something to the idea that if you can package your stuff in such a way that it's easier for people to talk about, that you might end up getting more referrals, that more people might start talking to you. And at the end of that workshop, I had sort of offered everybody the opportunity to do hot seats. And every single person said that they wanted their hot seat to be on creating a referable brand. Yeah. So the second I saw that, I said, you know what? I need to dig deeper into this. I need to really start to think about this. And that's when I started to look for the patterns. And one of the most important things I talk about is the fact that patterns are the precursors to frameworks. If you want to build frameworks around your ideas, you just look at the patterns. And the patterns that I noticed helped me develop a very, very specific framework for creating a referable brand, which we're going to be digging into today.
Yeah, I love it, because one of the things that you shared with me today are 3 steps that we need to actually apply in our business and kind of like unbox, right, and figure it out. And the first one was accessibility. And I think that for me is one of the things I struggle with the most. I love how you talked about that, so I don't want to mess it up. I'll let you talk about accessibility, influence, and memory. But let's start with my challenge, because why not?
Sure, no worries. So the challenge that most people have with accessibility is that we fall into what I like to refer to as the echo chamber of the enlightened, where everybody in our industry is using a lot of the same words. So we're also using those same words. And after a while, it starts to get to a point where we are so bogged down in jargon that people who are not in our industry, and sometimes even people who are in our industry, are sitting there saying, like, how do I figure out what it is that you're actually talking about? Right. And as entrepreneurs, we get very excited about the idea of our innovation. And what I always like to talk about with this particular concept is, I call it finding your Celine. So if you're familiar with the story from Power of Habit, there's this really, really interesting detail about the song Hey Ya by Outkast. And in the early stages, when that song was first released, basically people shut it off right away. And the reason why they shut it off, even though it did very, very well on the hit machine, which basically evaluates whether or not a song will be a hit, is that the sound of Hey Ya was so different than any other sound that was out there. So what the radio stations did was they put Celine Dion first, Hey Ya in the middle, and then Maroon 5 afterwards. And the reason behind this is that if you've ever listened to a Celine Dion song, you've actually listened to all of them. Right? Yeah. Is the way that it works. Yeah. So the thing is, that sound was so familiar that people would listen all the way through the content. So they would listen all the way through from Celine to Hey Ya, all the way through to Maroon 5. The unfamiliar became familiar. And most of the time, we're trying to introduce people to our Hey Ya when what we really need to do is find our Celine.
Love that. Paul?
I just want to sit and think about that. I'm like, wow. That's really, wow. Because I spend a lot of time. One of the things I've been proud about in my career is that I've spent a lot of time looking at how people in my profession do things, and then purposely going, how could I do it differently? Because I don't want to just be like everybody else. But I've always just focused on that really and trying to communicate that. And I haven't had a Celine. Tell me more about that, Michael.
Yeah, sure. So the thing is, right, we have pitched differentiation as the power player in business for forever, right? We've always said that if you're different, that's what's going to make you successful. That's what's going to make it all work. But the problem is that what that's done is made it so that everybody's different is now starting to sound the same. Because you got all these people teaching you how to be different, but they're giving you formulas, right? They're not giving you frameworks. They're saying, here is my 5-step system for being different, right? And it's just like that Monty Python skit where basically in Life of Brian, he says to the entire crowd, he's like, guys, you don't get it. You're all individuals. And they all chant back, yes, we're all individuals. This is what happens in the marketing world, right? So like all these people have taught us these formulas of like, here's my six-step process. or here's my script for how you're going to talk to influencers and all this other stuff. And what happens is you end up becoming the bootleg version of somebody else.
Right.
Like that. When I used to teach high school, when I had student teachers, if one of the teachers basically tried to like imitate me as a teacher, my students would say they didn't respect that teacher because they were a bootleg version of me. They were just trying to sort of not even riff off, basically rip off my process, right? Like what I was doing. So the thing is, you never want to be a bootleg version of somebody else.
Yeah.
You want to think about like, what is it that is yours that you really buy into? But the thing is, nobody is going to basically trust your innovation until they feel like you've helped them understand what it is that you're doing on an accessible level. So until you've helped them understand that you can be trusted, nobody's going to be like, yeah, I'm going to take this like massive leap with you. So a lot of the time we try to come up with like the cool way to describe what we do. And we're like, hey, I just came up with this really cool word and this really cool, process. And it's fun for us, but it's not useful at all. When I used to work in Broadway, shows lived and died by their title.
Right.
If you called a show the wrong thing, you basically lost your audience. And business owners have to think of their business like a Broadway show. If you're going to get people to spend money with you, they have to get it right away. It can't be like, oh, well, maybe, you'll figure it out and you'll come. No, they have to get it right away. It's like, I've described this before. It's like win, lose, or draw, right? How do you win, lose, or draw? You win, lose, or draw by communicating the information fast, by making sure that people know exactly what it is you're trying to say right away, as opposed to spending a bunch of time trying to figure out what it is that you actually offer. So most of the time, from an accessibility standpoint, we get in our own way with that aspect of differentiation. To your point, Paul, the other major thing about this is that, and this actually ties to something I'll talk about later, but academics for years have rewarded complexity. So if you were in school and you wrote a paper with really big words, you were considered the smart kid.
Yeah.
So as a result, we think complexity is what's going to win us. We think complexity is going to make us stand out and be different and all of those types of things. But the memory rewards simplicity. Mm-hmm. We remember things that are simple. We remember things that we get right away. We don't remember the 27 steps. We remember the 3.
And one of those, when you and I were talking a second ago, I was telling we dove into my jargon, and one of the things that I always say is conversions. And I was like, how do you say conversions in a different way, right? Because nobody understands conversions outside of this internet marketing business thing. And one of my things, like as someone who doesn't know how to speak outside of their jargon, I would be like, well, if you don't know what conversions are, then you're not going to work with me because you don't understand what I do, and why would I explain that to you, right? And this is fine, but what happens is like nobody can refer to me, and then I'm really killing the entire process, right? Of referrals and new leads and all that stuff. So what you got me to do is how do you teach that? How do you explain that to a 5-year-old?
Sure.
Right? And then I said, right? And I was like, okay, well, we just help you buy more stuff. Right? I was like, okay, a 5-year-old can understand that. And I think also this is what you're talking about, the simplicity, because if someone says, you should talk to Ifat, she just help people buy your stuff more. That's it, right? There's no conversion or anything like that, and it's easy to remember. I think the hardest thing is why people need someone like you is because we're in our own world, not even knowing how to explain or what the issue is at all, right? Because I was like, everybody knows conversions. You don't know conversions? What's wrong with you?
Exactly. And the metaphor that I often like to use is that with our own message, with our own language, we've got our face pressed up against a TV screen and we're seeing colored pixels. And we need people in our lives to basically tell us what's on TV, and most importantly, to tell us how to change the channel, or if we need to change the channel. And when we're that close to our content and to our material, it's very, very easy to think, well, everybody should just know this.
Right.
Everybody should just sort of, handle this, and think about this. And when we put ourselves in that particular place, then what we're doing is we're pushing everybody else away, because we're like, oh, well, you just don't understand it. Like, you just don't get it, right? And if you want people to refer you, you never want them to feel like they're going to look stupid explaining what it is that you do. Right? And all too often, we think about like, well, how do I want it to sound, or how do I want it to look, or everybody should already know this. But at the heart of things, people want to look good when they share something. They don't want to look bad. So if you give them something that's overly complex, they actually won't share it.
Right.
Not because it's not good, but because they don't want to look bad.
Right.
Yeah. And then you move from, once you figure out how to talk about your business so other people outside of your market actually understand what it is that you do, then you move to the second step, which is influence.
Yes.
And it's different than what everybody thinks about influence, isn't it?
Exactly. So most of the time when we're thinking about influence, we're thinking about it from the angle of persuasion.
Right.
We're thinking about it from the aspect of, I'm going to try to get somebody to do something using particular tools to get them to do what I want them to do. And the fact of the matter is that if we try to do that, yes, we might be able to get some people to share it. Like a lot of those tools actually work. But what works way better is crafting our stuff in such a way that it makes other people look good. So if we create something that then causes somebody else to go out and actually share it and say, check out this thing that I found, check out this cool thing, then what happens is then that gets referred back to us. And the metaphor that I used for this is the magic trick. Mm-hmm. So we all have met magicians at some point in our lives who basically will show us a trick. And almost every magician has a trick that they can say, okay, now here's how I pull that coin out of your ear. Here's how I make that card disappear from your hand. Here's how I make the salt shaker disappear from the table. And then what is the very next thing that we do? We go to a party and we become the amateur magician. Even though we know, like we want to share it. And most of the time when we're thinking about our business and we're thinking about specifically our expertise, we lack a magic trick. Like, we do not take the time to say, what is a framework that I could give somebody that's so easy to share that they would just go to their friends and share it because it makes them look better. And I talk about this all the time. There's tons of TED Talks out there, right? Lots and lots of TED Talks. But if you ask most people, like a general audience, like which TED Talks they remember, there's going to be one that's going to pop up over and over and over again, especially amongst people in the coaching space and the leadership space. And I don't think I've done too many interviews where I've asked this question and somebody hasn't listed this talk almost immediately. Give it a shot. Go for it.
Is that Brené Brown?
That's one of the most popular. It's not the one that I'm thinking of.
Simon Sinek.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yep. Most people go to the Start With Why as sort of the TED Talk that they remember. And what we forget about is that was a TED Talk that was literally built so that you could look cool in front of your friends. Because everybody knows how to draw a circle and everybody knows how to say start with why and look brilliant in front of everybody else. It is the simplest concept and it's the easiest to share. So you could watch tons of other TED Talks on leadership, but you might feel awkward trying to explain to somebody what that talk was about or sort of helping people understand it. But you can pull out a napkin, draw that bullseye, and point to that idea of start with why. And it's so easy that everybody else is just like, oh my God, that's amazing. Where did you find that? Where did you get that? And the thing that most people forget about is that Simon comes from a marketing background. So if you actually watch that talk, the talk is basically marketing him. Without him actually saying like, hey, I'm Simon Sinek, hire me. It's basically like, here's all this like really, really useful stuff that you can then share with your friends, and everybody's going to ask you where you got it from. So now, oh, by the way, I've got a consulting business in leadership. Maybe you should purchase, right? It is a classic structured marketing thing where it's like most people, when they do a TED Talk, they're like, this is who I am and here's my ideas.
Right.
Simon said, here's the idea. Here's how you can be the hero. And oh, by the way, I'm Simon Sinek.
Wow. I see Paul just going like, yeah, okay, Paul, while you're thinking about this, we're going to move to the memory, which kind of like aligns with that. But so this is why you are fascinating to me and why I feel like you are such a secret weapon in the arsenal of your clients, because it is so hard to come up with that magic trick. And most people are so guarded about like, no, that's my magic trick. If you take it, what am I going to sell? Right? And so you coming in and going like, no, this is a magic trick that actually going to help you sell your stuff. That's where your brilliance comes in. And I'm sure most of your clients have said, this is it, I didn't know I can do this. And now you can jump out.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that we kind of worry about is we worry about this idea of like, well, what if I share my ideas? What if I share my IP? And like all these different types of things kind of come up, right?
Right.
But ultimately, and we actually talked about this on our call. We talked about the aspect of like real thought leadership gets you to think differently.
Right.
Right. So what you're doing is you're just giving people a tool to help them think differently. You're not doing the actual coaching work with them because there isn't enough time.
Right.
Right. So if you're sharing something in a 20-minute interview, a 30-minute interview, an hour-long interview, you can help. Right? But you're not going to solve the entire problem. It's just not, it's just not possible. But if you can help somebody think slightly differently about their world, then every time they think differently, they're thinking of you. And that is a very, very powerful thing. So if you have a piece of intellectual property that every time somebody uses it, they think of you, then you're always going to have referrals coming your way. You're always going to have people talking about what it is that you do. And you don't actually have to do, the hard teaching. You don't have to do the serious, like I'm breaking down every single piece of the coaching, because that ties to what we're going to talk about with memory, which is the aspect of we can't take it all in.
Right. So let's dive into that. Let's talk
yeah.
about memory. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the way I like to think about memory is that if you want people to remember you more, you have to focus on less, LESS. And that is language, emotion, simplicity, and structure. So I'll start with language. So most of the time, when we think about our language, we're using somebody else's language. We don't often have our own words for things. And the example that I always like to use is, again, I'll do another quiz for you. Name for me the most popular children's author that you can think of right now who has a massive social media presence, who if I say the name, everybody gets the name pretty much right away. Anybody want to throw out?
You said children?
Yeah, children or young adults. Yeah.
The first thing came to mind was Dr. Seuss, but they don't have a media.
Yeah, he's too old. J.K. Rowling would be the
bingo.
Yeah.
Yep.
The modern one. Yeah.
Exactly. So why, right? Because almost everybody listening to this interview knows what a muggle is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is the thing. If you have your own language for things, that is basically an imprint in somebody else's brain. I cannot say muggle without referring back to Harry Potter. And then I'm drawing up all of the memories of all of the people who have watched the movies or read the movies. So I am in your brain right now because I said that. Yeah. Like that is what happens from a memory standpoint. And all too often, we don't do the additional labor it takes to come up with our own words for something or our own way of framing a particular message. So there's lots of stuff out there. But most of the time we just use somebody else's thing, right? So if you're saying, "Oh, here's my blueprint," right?
Yeah.
Everybody else has used the blueprint. So what word could you come up with that means the same thing as blueprint, but it's yours? It is yours. It's your language. And when you have
But
your language,
don't you
people start
risk,
talking about it.
Don't you risk
Yeah.
people not knowing what you're talking about?
So that's the thing. In the early stages, you're going to have that initial aspect of education, right? And going back to what we were talking about with accessibility, you're going to have to use that accessibility lever to introduce that new word. Or you're going to need to take the word and add one, simple concept to that particular word. And leadership has gone through this all the time, right? So there's leadership, but then somebody tacks on servant leadership, and all of a sudden it's a completely different thing. Right?
Yeah.
And it's just like these little things, right? Or the idea of, leading by following. Like when people just sort of take these words and sort of shift them a little bit, it suddenly becomes their thing. It suddenly becomes the thing that they own, their intellectual property. So most of us do not take the time to put our own language to things. And when we don't do that, basically we're giving the power to somebody else. So whoever has come up with the term, and gets people to use that term, they're going to get more traction. And if you want to look at an example of this, look at the music industry. Tons and tons of artists out there, but there's only one Bayhive. Tons and tons of people out there who follow certain musicians, but Lady Gaga and her Little Monsters took off. Why? Because ultimately, people will look towards titles and concepts as a form of identity.
I love what you're saying. Yeah. You basically just gave the framework of how to build a tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Because now you're all coming together around a shared concept, and that is your concept. That's what makes you unique. This is why you're a part of it.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like when you give language to something, right? People then start to say like, oh, this is my language, and now I'm going to use this language, right? So if you look at even something like an AA, right? There are so many people who that message spread because there was specific language tied to it. The idea of the 12 steps, everybody knows, right? But if that hadn't been packaged, if that hadn't been structured in its own way, if that didn't have its own words for what they're doing, right? Think about how much harder it would have been to spread. So that's language, right?
Yeah.
Next is emotion. So the thing that we often forget about, but is at the heart of every experience that we have, is that emotion solidifies memory. So if I asked you right now to remember the most boring part of your day, you probably couldn't give me a lot of images, right? Like you probably couldn't come up with what was actually happening. But if I told you to remember the worst moment in your life that basically makes you cry, then you could tell me exactly who you were with. You could tell me exactly what it looked like. You could give me all of the details because emotion solidifies memory. So what we lack a lot of the time when we're creating that message is digging in and creating emotion. So you talk about Brene Brown. Think about how emotional her talk was. That is something that that helped solidify the memory piece of it, right? Yeah. We felt her emotion as she talked about her own experience. And what happens is when somebody talks about their own experience and they're feeling emotion, we're all feeling emotion at the same time. So I'm not only listening to the thing that's causing the emotion, but I'm also feeling it and remembering my own experience. So you have just made me feel your thing double. So if you tell me a really intense emotional story and then you tie it to your thought leadership or to your content, you have just made me remember a moment in my life, and you've solidified your thought leadership content to me. I've just instantly gotten it, right? Simplicity is the next one, right? So the metaphor I use is pile of apples versus a bag. So if I handed you 20 apples and I said, carry these apples across the room, you're going to drop an apple. And your brain is the same way. If I said, here's 27 points on how to create a referable brand, you're not going to remember.
Right.
You're going to forget all the points. But if I say accessibility, influence, and memory, and it's easy to remember because it spells the word AIM, then you've got a bag now, and you can just transfer that information. right?
Yeah.
You can transfer that information, and that is simplicity at the heart of it. And again, memory rewards simplicity, academics reward complexity. And then lastly, structure. We never read a book by starting in the middle and then jumping around unless we're reading one of those choose your own adventure, kinds of books, right? We need a logical progression. So even with this presentation, think about it. If I started by talking about memory and then I went backwards and talked about influence and then talked about accessibility, logically, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
I've got to start with you understanding it. Then I've got to talk about how I'm going to get you to share it. Then I got to talk about how I'm going to package it so that it's shared easily, right? It's a logical progression. And most of the time we forget about that idea of structure. People need structure. They need to know it goes this, this, and this. Otherwise, the brain is just too confused and can't handle the information.
And I'm guilty of it so much because I already think so many people already know accessibility, right? The first step. Let me jump into what do you do with it. And you're right, most people don't know the first step, specifically because we talked about it jargonly. So we haven't brought them in. I want to bring in the person responsible for you and I meeting. And thank her in person. Heather, amazing woman, how are you?
Hello, so good to see you all.
It's fantastic to have
Heather.
you.
Hi, Michael. Oh, I just love your stuff. I mean, I'm sitting here just poring over because the interesting thing is I'd never, the way that you present it makes it so obvious, so clear, and it's funny because I think back a few years when I was looking at the things that I teach on, that I work with my clients on, I sat down and I made a list, and it was literally you can imagine in law and business, it's a very big pot of things that I teach and help my clients on. It's 30 items, but I was like, how do I simplify this down into something that I can say, well, here's the map. It's not 30 things, it's 5 things, right?
Yep.
And so I did it, but I couldn't come up with the name. I love even your guidance around making the name memorable. But I came up with, and I just call it my 5 bucket system for business protection. And it's literally a visual in 5 buckets, and there's a map, and but it's funny because people and I've done this presentation enough now, even if they can't remember all the 5 buckets, I have one friend who has me regularly present to his group. He'll be like, wait till you hear about her bucket. He knows the bucket, right? And so I'm partly in my head thinking well, am I only partway there? They remember that I have a system and that there are buckets, but they don't remember all 5.
Yeah. And that's a lot of the time we come up with that. But then there's that extra challenge of making sure that people can sort of piece together all of the elements. So sometimes we create a mnemonic. Sometimes it's about sort of giving people a journey that they're going on. Sometimes it's giving them a visual. So you might be hearing my young one in the, I've got a 6-month-old in the background. But she's getting excited about the buckets as well.
It is really exciting.
We might be giving them a visual, right? And basically being are these buckets being used, just as a way to sort of think about it, are these buckets being used to put out fires? And what are each of the fires, right? So you're sort of helping people understand each of these fires gets put out by this particular bucket or this particular thing that you do, right? So that's one example of a visual that you could use, right? So you think about how does the person listening create a logical progression in whatever it is that you're explaining, and for some people that's phases, for some people that's a toolkit of use this thing, use that thing, and that side of things. But that's always the thing. We can come up with the metaphor, we can come up with the idea, but sometimes the logic of it ends up being the challenge, helping people understand that structure. And there's lots of different ways to play around with structure.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love so much. I mean, I'm over here in my Evernote, taking so many notes. So good work.
Thank you so much.
It's fascinating because you are completely shifting the way we think about talking ourselves and how to engage with people over what we do. And I've heard it so many times, outcomes, and fear and disgust and anger and stuff like that. But when you and I were talking, it was fantastic. We talked about how you want to be the doctor that helps and not the person who comes in and stamps on your wounds and make it worse. And
Yeah.
so your framework really helps people position themselves as the doctors, as the authority that, you know, comes into like, oh, you need to see this doctor. Your back hurts, go see that doctor. Right?
Exactly. And the thing is, like, we look for ways to understand the problems that we have, right? So like, if you think about it, like if you're experiencing any kind of pain, you're probably going to go to WebMD or Google or do something to try and figure out like, where is this pain coming from, or sort of what this process is, because we're naturally curious as to like, what is the reason behind it. So if you're able to give somebody a framework or a process to help them start to do that work, where they're sort of like introspective and they're like, oh, this is how I am, or this is what I'm about, then by helping them understand the issue, helping them understand the problem, they're naturally going to want to come to you and say, but here's my problem. Here's my specific, here's my specific thing. And here's the thing that I want to work on with you. This helped me kind of understand it, but I still feel like there's more. I still feel like there's something else. And we were talking about this where it's like, there's the marketing that's teasing you and saying like, hey, here's the next, layer, et cetera. And then there's the marketing that's teaching you where it's like, here's how to do this, or here's how to think about this. And when you're taught, you're basically saying like, okay, now I understand things, but how do I do more? How do I make more happen with the education that I've received? Versus, as we were talking about that, like pressing on the wound and basically being like, hey, you're broken. And because you're broken, you need me. And I'm going to solve your problem. So, click on my webinar or my free link or blah, 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 and all of this other, and all of this other stuff. And people are getting tired, I think, especially now, of being told they're broken, right?
Yeah.
I think people are getting tired of being shamed for the fact that they're not making 7 figures or 8 figures or whatever the latest, push is, right? Like people are tired of being shamed, and they want to feel empowered. They want to feel like they have some control over the work that they're doing. And I often, I call this the myth of the Deus Ex Machina. So in the theater world, there's this idea of like a God coming down from the heavens and solving everything for you. And you never want to become somebody's Deus Ex Machina. Like you never want them to think that you're just going to solve all of their problems, because you basically created one of the worst clients that you can have.
Right.
So you never want to position yourself in a way that says, I'm going to fix it all. You're broken and you need me and I'm going to fix it all. You never want to position yourself like that, because you're just going to attract people who believe it, who believe that you're going to fix everything. And guess what? You're not going to fix everything. None of us can fix everything, because there's all sorts of stuff that we have no idea how to fix.
Right.
So much better to help people understand these are the issues, these are the problems, these are the challenges. And if this thing is something that you're interested in doing more work on, or if you just want to talk more about it, I'm more than happy to talk with you about it. And it's such a different way of approaching, this aspect. And people will want to refer you if they know that there's no danger in the referral. Like one of the main reasons why people don't get referred is that they make a referral and then the other person comes back and says, oh my God, I was on the phone with that person for 30 minutes and they kept telling me that I had to buy their 50,000. And by the time I got off the phone, because if I didn't get off the phone, it was going to be 100,000. And I just like, I don't want to do it, and I felt so, and I felt so awful. And the problem is those experiences then cause people to, that memory, that emotional component.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, the second that you say, I want to refer you to so-and-so, if you're in that same industry, people are like, yeah, I don't want to talk to that person.
Right. And what's funny is that now the world is so small with the internet that referrals go both ways, right? Like, I don't want to talk to this person. is just as, just as permanent as, yeah, let me refer you to someone who can really help. So
Exactly.
now you guys understand why I want to spend hours with this guy working on my own stuff. He is brilliant. And if you guys want to get a hold of him as well, bethenakedtruth.com/live. You'll see a link to his website. Opt into his email list because you'll get tons of really, really powerful information to help you on your journey. And we'll definitely, I'm going to have you on That Gig. We'll talk some more because this is fantastic.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Michael. This was like really, really awesome. Talking about like thought leadership, right? Like fantastic, amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's brilliant. And guys, just to remind you, all of you who commented and interacted with us, you are going to be added to our Wheel of Fame. So you too can win something this Friday. So make sure you're there. And with that, thank you so much. We will see you tomorrow when we're talking about thinking and growing rich. So.
Hey, if you enjoyed today's episode, come back and spend more time with us. You could be on the broadcast sharing your thoughts. We hang out live Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern at www.bethenakedtruth.com/live.